I moved to Chicago after college, and I lived with a group of people called the Little Brothers of the Poor. We lived in community. This organization had started as a Catholic brotherhood, a sort of mission to elderly people in Chicago. It was a very large organization in France that started after World War II. And one of the brothers came to Chicago to start an outpost and then met somebody and got married, which kind of ruined the whole thing of it being a group of monks. And France responded by saying, not a bad idea, and they became a secular organization over in France as well. But we still kept some of the vestiges of a monastery. We all lived in a house together, and we shared meals. And it was a motley crew of people. All these people doing justice, helping the disenfranchised, people who were isolated and elderly in the big city. And it was quite a cast of characters. One of my roommates was Tommy, who was a very devout Catholic, who would have been a priest if it had not been for his libido. There was Jim, who was also Catholic and thoroughly disgusted with Catholicism and religion in general. There was Norm, a practicing Jew who thought this was a good way in his retirement to return to the community. And there was Sandy, who was a non-practicing Jew who seemed more interested in partying than anything else. It was there that I met a girl named Gail, not this Gail, but another Gail, who was my first Unitarian, who probably did one of the worst jobs of proselytizing that I ever heard. I said, well, what are Unitarians? And I said, well, we're not really Christian, but we go to church anyway. And so I was with all these people, and I myself was motivated by my Christian faith that we love because God first loved us. But I recognized that all these other people were doing the same work I did from a variety of religious and non-religious perspectives. And it was there that I started the question of whether God is the source of all goodness. I mean, people associate goodness with godliness. The words have the same root. So much so that when people hear the word atheist, they often hear the meaning amoral. Because they think, how can anybody be good without God? Good and evil are opposite concepts. And theism transforms these philosophical concepts into supreme anthropomorphic beings called God and the devil. But perhaps good and evil exist apart from God and the devil. In fact, some recent atheists suggest that focusing on the myth of God and devil impedes people from recognizing the reality of good and evil on this earth. Christopher Hitchens in God is Not Good writes, religion even boasts of a special branch of itself devoted to the study of the end. It calls itself eschatology and broods incessantly on the passing away of all earthly things. This death cult refuses to abate even though we have every reason to believe that the earthly things are all that we have or are ever going to have. Yet in our hands and within our view is the whole universe of discovery and clarification, which is a pleasure to study in itself. It gives the average person access to insights that not even Darwin or Einstein possessed, and offers the promise of near miraculous advances in healing, in energy, and peaceful exchanges between different cultures. Yet millions of people in all societies still prefer the myths of the cave and the tribe and blood sacrifice. From the Muslim perspective, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was born in Somalia in 1970. Spent most of her life as a refugee in Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia and Kenya. She was supposed to marry a stranger who was from her clan living in Canada, but when she got to Europe, she sought asylum in Holland. She was shunned by her family. She still considered herself a Muslim, even though she rejected their treatment of women. But 9/11 changed everything. The little shutter at the back of my mind where I pushed all my discordant thoughts snapped open after the 9/11 attacks, and it refused to close. And I found myself thinking that the Quran is not a holy document. It is a historical record, written by humans. It is one version of events, as perceived by men who wrote it 150 years after the Prophet Muhammad died. It is a very tribal, Arab version of events. It spreads a culture that is brutal, fixated on controlling women, and harsh in war. The Prophet did teach a lot of good things. I found it spiritually appealing to believe in a hereafter. My life was enriched by Quranic injunctions to be compassionate and show charity to others. And there were times when I, like many Muslims, found it too complicated to deal with the whole issue of war against unbelievers. Most Muslims never delve into theology, and we rarely read the Quran. We are taught in Arabic, which most Muslims cannot speak. As a result, most people think Islam is about peace. As she started to speak out against the threat of the Muslim community, she took comfort in the life of Spinoza, who was a secular Jew who, like her, came to Holland to escape religious bigotry. Nature created itself, Spinoza said. Reason, not obedience, should guide our lives. Though it took centuries to crumble the entire ossified cage of European social hierarchy, from kings to serf, between men and women, all of it shored up by the Catholic Church was destroyed by this thought. Now surely it was Islam's turn to be tested. Humans themselves are the source of good and evil, I thought. We must think for ourselves. We are responsible for our own morality. In The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins also cites the atrocities committed in the name of religion. And Dawkins has an evolutionary explanation for religion, stating that it is a byproduct of something else. My specific hypothesis is about children. More than any other species, we survive by the accumulated experience of previous generations. And that experience needs to be passed on to children for their protection and well-being. Theoretically, children might learn from experience not to go too near the cliff edge, not to eat the untried red berries, not to swim in crocodile-infested waters. But to say the least, there will be a selective advantage to the child brains that possess the rule of thumb: believe without question what grown-ups tell you. But the flip side of trusting obedience is slavish gullibility. An automatic consequence is that the truster has no way of distinguishing good advice from the bad. The child cannot know, "Don't paddle in the crocodile-infested Limpopo" is good advice, but you must sacrifice a goat at the time of the full moon, otherwise rains will fall, is at best a waste of time and goats. The major problem with religion or belief in God, in the terms of these three authors, is the notion of unquestioning obedience. This traps and enslaves people and causes violence against any who disagree. When people are confronted by reason, when they're told that their beliefs are not real in a material, scientific sense, they often react with violence. So what are non-believers to do? If they confront the irrationality of religion, they are endangering their social standing and perhaps even their lives. This brings me to the difference between goodness and justice. The good is beneficial. Anything that benefits anyone, they will perceive as good. But also, being good carries the connotation of obeying authority. Obedience is very beneficial to authority figures. Be a good boy. Be a good girl. Be a good soldier. Follow orders. Justice, on the other hand, holds authority to a higher standard. God is good by definition. God follows God's own authority. But it's another question to ask if God is just. If God is all-loving, why is suffering allowed? If God created humans as imperfect creatures, is it just to punish them for sinning? If God sent Jesus for salvation, is it just to punish all people who never heard of Jesus? Dogmatic theists would argue that it's not good to question God's justice. But I believe that one can be good without God. In fact, it's pretty easy. Just select some higher authority. Any government, religion, or philosophy will do. And once that authority is selected, you can just follow the rules without question. And one will be good in the context of that authority. If one commits oneself to consumerism and profiteering, one will soon be leading the good life. Some Christians advocate a prosperity gospel. If one follows the rules and you tithe your money, it will come back to you 100-fold. If one is sincere in one's giving, one can live the good life here on earth. I envy them because their pledge drives are often more successful than ours. Instead of living the good life, justice asks us to live the fair life. I am glad to receive money for the work I do. It is good that it is beneficial to me. It is good that this congregation follows the UUA guidelines for fair compensation. But is it fair that I receive so much more than a certified nursing assistant? Emptying bedpans is much harder than preaching a sermon. As a preacher, I only have to worry about verbal diarrhea. It is good to own a house. One is obeying the vision of the American dream. But is it fair to have two homes when others have none? Is it fair to have a home on land stolen from Native Americans? Is it just to worship a God that is unjust? If one rejects an unjust God, then what is the standard of justice? There is no one standard. And even those who claim that God is an unwavering standard, all you have to do is look at all the varieties and interpretation of what the word God means to realize that even in religion, there is no unwavering standard of what is just. So both the religious and the non-religious have to look to one another and ask, what is fair? The good is anything beneficial, but justice occurs when goodness is shared. Now, a lot of times, the idea of justice gets confused with vengeance. And vengeance is when evil is shared. You hurt me is my so-called justification for hurting you. Our current justice system is mostly a vengeance system. We punish people for disobeying authority. A vengeance system says, because you killed, you must die. A justice system removes the murderer from society for the benefit of society, but then also assures that the murderer is treated humanely, given food, shelter, and health care. And if we offer food, shelter, and health care to those who commit the ultimate crime, why do we leave so many people on the street who have committed no crime without food, shelter, or health care? Justice is sharing the good. Serving food to someone is good. People paying for food is good. Everybody who works in a restaurant getting the share of the profits is just. And there are even some restaurants, I think it's some Panera restaurants have experimented with a pay-as-you-can policy, where people who can pay for themselves and maybe a little extra for others. And people who can't pay come to the restaurant and eat. And so far, this experiment has resulted in restaurants that are self-sustaining and even profitable. What an odd experiment in justice. Love is good. Committing to loving one other person is good. Supporting the opportunity to marry with the LGBT community is just. Sharing resources with others to build a better society is just. Everyone having a voice and a vote and making a rule we live by is just. Democracy is sharing your voice and vote. Bill Gates is making a lot of money, which is good for him. And people have benefited from buying his computers. But now that he has made more money than he needs, he is working full-time to share it through foundations and taxes and charity. Goodness is simple. If something is beneficial, it is good. Any individual who receives a benefit will declare it good. and any authority benefits from obedience and tell you that you are a good citizen. But justice is harder to manage, because sometimes the good citizen is called to disagree and to protest and to work for change. The question, is this fair, can be asked over and over. We ask it of others, and others ask it of us. When we ask, is it fair to God or the universe, we are asking something that is beyond our control. For the most part, God and the universe are silent. The Spirit is like the wind. It blows where it will. We cannot ask a tornado to be just. It just is what it is. Whether a force or nature or an act of God, a tornado does not answer why. It can't answer why this house was destroyed and that one across the street was saved. It had nothing to do with the morality of the people in either house. It does not choose who is destroyed or saved on the basis of fairness. But when we ask each other, what is fair? We are asking someone over which we can work with to gain control of our lives. When we ask each other what is fair, the possibility of justice emerges. When one state is hit by a natural disaster, other states usually respond by helping. We ask ourselves, is it fair to live in comfort when others are not? We share what comfort we can spare. And the work of justice is never done. Sometimes the work of goodness can be done. You can follow all the rules till the day you die, and you did the good thing. But justice has a higher demand. It asks, even though this may be good, shouldn't I try to make it better? The good life is only fair if it can be shared. If one has an exclusive notion of God, if they are satisfied with their own salvation while condemning others to hell, the goodness of their religion is not shared, and thus their God is not just. Justice is goodness shared. If your religion does not welcome everyone, it may be good for you, but it's not just. If your atheism does not share the benefits of reason with others, it may be good for you, and you can live in smug satisfaction, but it's not just. You must engage with other people and share your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. Justice takes us beyond our personal benefit, beyond our personal salvation, our personal wealth, or our personal knowledge. We live in a place and time that encourages us to live the good life. This morning, I ask all of us to shift our thinking and live a fair life. A fair life that shares all good things, where any blessings received is a blessing to be shared. May we bless and be blessed.